I recently made a video showing design concepts for the next generation Honda Goldwing that I created using an online AI tool. And I thought I'd try that with some other Honda models, so that's what this video is about. Last time I used Microsoft's Copilot GPT, I guess they call it, which, you give it an image or just ask it to draw something and it creates images. Google's got this similar tool called Gemini, which I tried this time. And again, they work very similarly. And the first one I'm going to try is my Honda CB400 Four. Not all the bikes I tried on this video are my own or have been my own, but this one is. So like all of these AI tools, you just upload or paste a photo in and then tell it to use that photo to design modern versions of the motorcycle. I tell it what the bike is, so it has that reference. And here are some of the results I got. This first one is pretty straightforward. I wouldn't say it looks like an ultra-modern bike, but it does recall somewhat the lines of the 400 Four. Not too bad. The second one, again, I like the look of it, but I'm not sure that it's actually what I'd call a modern bike. It could very well pass for a modified version of an old bike. And you'll see that quite often in the results I got. This one definitely looks more modern. I don't see a lot of the 400 Four in it, aside from maybe the black side covers, but it doesn't look too bad. This is likely my favorite one of the 400 renderings. Again, it looks like a modern motorcycle, but at the same time, it has retained a lot of the lines that the original 400 had. Even the exhaust, I notice, is kind of tapered like a cone on the end, which the actual 400 Four has, even though it didn't see it in this photo. So yeah, I think that one looks pretty good, and of the 400s that I was able to get out of the AI tool, this is the one I probably like the most. This one's not bad either. Again, it looks very modern, but it's also got some features which pay homage to the 400 Four. Again, the side cover looks similar. The overall stance and shape of the bike looks similar. I'm not nuts about the headlight. I think if it had an older style headlight, in my opinion, it would look better. This one, again, could pass as a modified version of the original, so I wouldn't call it a modern design. I don't know how many cylinders this one has. The AI tools have a hard time with details like that. This looks like a more modern design. Doesn't necessarily look like a 2020s design, maybe 1990s or 2000s, but not a bad looking bike. And it does, again, have lines that somewhat recall the original 400. The shape of the tank especially, I think, has that same kind of bread box look to it. This one, I think, could really just be a modified version of the old one if it had enough cylinders. I like the look of this one. It's, again, fairly modern. Got a cool stance, and again, the lines do look a bit like the 400. Yeah, not a bad rendering, that one. I'm not nuts about this one. Maybe the color is a bit of a turn off, but the design just doesn't look like the 400 Four to me, aside from the pipes, which are pretty well done. And as with all these AI tools, it'll come up with some pretty radical looking stuff, and this is not a very practical motorcycle, but it does look kind of cool, so I thought I'd throw it in. It also made this one as a more modern bike, and I do like the look of this, I have to say. And you still have a bit of a bend in the exhaust pipes there. Wouldn't make you think of a 400 Four when you first see it, other than the pipes, but still a pretty cool looking bike. And you can have a lineup of classic Hondas without including the CB750, so I've tossed that one in as well. The first one that came up with here does, again, look more like just a modified version of the original. Doesn't necessarily look like a new bike per se. The same for this one, except for the inverted front shocks, and otherwise, again, it could just be a modified older bike. The same for this one. I threw it in because I think it looks pretty cool. This one definitely looks more modern. It's got a box aluminum frame, and I like the colors, and I like the overall shape of the bike. Again, these very thin seats, which I don't know would be very comfortable, but not a bad looking motorcycle. This one definitely brings to mind the CB900s and the CB1100s. Not a bad looking bike. This one could just be a modified version of an oldie. I like the look of this one. It brings to mind Yamaha more than a Honda, honestly. I don't know why. Maybe the tank. But I think it's a pretty good looking bike. And I like the stance of it. It looks very sporty, I think. The same for this one. Has a similar stance. And again, doesn't necessarily look like a 2020s motorcycle. But I do like the look of it. I like the colors, the paint scheme, and the design. Overall, I think it's a nice looking motorcycle, even if it doesn't look super modern. This could just be a modded version of an older one. Doesn't look bad. This one is a bit of a departure. It's more like an older style almost. It makes me think of maybe the 1980s Yamaha Sikas. It's nonetheless not a bad looking bike. This one looks more like a track bike with an inline-4 engine, but I thought it was neat. This one looks similar to a couple of the others that I mentioned, kind of look like a Yamaha. I really like the look of it though. I like the stance, I like the exhaust pipes, and the overall kind of style and shape of it. It does look pretty nice. Doesn't necessarily make you think of a CB750, but still a good looking bike. And this one again is quite far from reality, but it does look pretty cool. I'd love to try it out. Speaking of bikes you might like to try out, I thought I'd throw the CBX in there as well. And the first one it came up with is pretty good. I have to say, I like the look of it. It does somewhat recall the lines of the original. I think it's only got 5 cylinders, but again, AI rarely gets those things right. Another example that looks pretty good. Doesn't look like a 2020s motorcycle, except that it has a more modern rear suspension. Anyway, I thought it looked pretty good. This one looks more like just a modified or a customized version, but not a bad looking design if you're into that kind of thing. And this one kind of went backwards. I don't know if you could call that a 6-cylinder engine in there, but that looks more like a retro 70s or 60s design than it does a modern CBX. I have no idea what that hood around the headlight's supposed to accomplish, but AI throws this stuff in there and sometimes it looks pretty neat. This one is just another example that looks probably more like an actual CBX in terms of the engine. Very small tank on it. That wouldn't get you far with those bikes. This one looks just like something that maybe you'd see in the 1980s. I think if you took the fairing off it, it might look quite modern. But when you ask this AI tool to take the fairing off a bike, it just gives you more designs. It doesn't really redesign that bike that it gave you last time. It just comes up with new ones every time. This one again looks a little more modern, but with only one seat. I wouldn't say that it's a practical bike, and it's got a straight exhaust, so I'm sure it would sound pretty mean. This one is, again, not very practical, but kind of cool, and I'd love to try it out. And of course, I wanted to try the Interceptor. I've never owned one, but I've always been a fan. Some of the ones that came up with do look quite modern, but they don't look much like an Interceptor. They have retained some of the color schemes. But I like the look of this one. It's got that modern naked bike stance. This one does as well. It's got a little more of a retro feel to it, but again, pretty cool looking motorcycle. This one I really like. It doesn't look as modern, but it's got a nice fairing. It recalls the 60s motorcycles with the cafe fairings. I thought it looked pretty good. There's a couple that look like this. Here's another example. And again, this one I think looks pretty nice. And there's yet another example that's got that cafe fairing, and still not a bad looking motorcycle. This one, yeah, at least it's got the similar fairing, but definitely doesn't look like a V4, and it doesn't really look very sporty, but I thought I'd throw it in because it's got some Interceptor elements. Here's another one that has that really modern naked bike look. And again, it doesn't look a lot like an Interceptor, but it looks like a really cool bike. I bet it would be fun to ride if it had a V4 750 engine. And speaking of V4 engines, I used to have a Honda V65 Sabre. Thought it was a fantastic bike. And I thought I'd get the AI to bring some new ones forth. And this is one example I quite like. It brings to mind maybe a Suzuki, but again, it's a good looking motorcycle, and a lot of times the AI uses the same color schemes, which really seems to work sometimes. I also like the look of this. It's less like a Sabre and almost more like a Magna, but it is kind of cool nonetheless. And then this one, a little bit out of proportion, I think, and not necessarily a great design, but it does have a bit of the Sabre style. And it came up with a few examples that are just really pretty radical, and like the top one here. The bottom one looks more like a mid-60s Honda racer in a way, but again, kind of neat, and they did get V engines. I like this one. It's again a more modern looking bike. Doesn't really bring to mind the Sabre much, but it is a modern kind of naked style bike. And if it had a V4 1100cc engine, I think it would be quite a hoot. Again, a few more modern versions. I wouldn't say these are modern. They're more like modified versions of the original than a modern design. I kind of like this one. I think it might just be the paint, but I like the overall stance of the bike as well, and it does have some elements like the continuous line that the Sabre has that runs from front to back. It retains that style, while at the same time it does look like a more modern motorcycle. And this one again has that naked bike stance and kickstand on the front fender. I'm not sure how that's supposed to work, but not a bad looking bike. And the last one I think that it came up with for the Sabre was this one, which again looks a little more like just a race bike than an actual street bike, but it looks pretty neat, I have to say. I would love to try out a bike that was designed like that with that V65 Sabre engine. And I thought I'd toss in the Z50R. We have an 86 model ourselves here, so I thought I would ask AI to come up with a few examples of a modern version, although we know Honda already makes one. And some of them are pretty cool, I have to say. They look a lot like actual Z50s, some of them. I couldn't get the AI to not put a headlight on the Z50, except whatever that is, but most of them had headlights. They retained that red and blue color scheme for the most part. Some pretty nifty looking little designs. I have to say I kind of like this one. It looks more like maybe a modern CRF 50, but it is a pretty neat design. I thought it was pretty cool. Got two kickstands for whatever reason. This one, probably a bit unrealistic. Maybe looks more like those Chinese bikes you can buy at your local department store, but it's kind of cool. This one, it has a bit of a Z50 vibe, but at the same time, it's not really otherwise like a Z50 in any way. But I thought it was pretty cool. And this one again looks more like other mini bikes. Doesn't necessarily look like a Z50. This one really looks just like a Z50, but it's funny how AI sometimes gets it very close or even goes backwards, because I gave it a 1986 Z50 and this looks more like maybe a 1970s version. As does this one. I thought it was pretty neat. It looks fairly close to an actual Z50. The modern monkey, which I've got a photo of here, is pretty close to that. So yeah, that's what AI does with some of the classic Hondas. I might do some other bikes in the future, but at first I thought I would just try it with a few Hondas to see what I could get from it. I thought it would be an interesting experiment. I hope you did too. If you did, please click like, subscribe, and check out some of my other videos. Thanks for watching.